there anything worse than being a fan of an opposing team and knowing a team is pulling off daylight robbery right in front of your faces and you can't do anything about it? You see Kevin Porter Jr., you see that he goes for a protected second round pick and you're like, yeah, that's a robbery. He's going to be at the very least, a very good role player who can score the ball, who can create, who can play defense with the potential to be a star, like an all-star level player, which I've said and other people have said, and you're getting him for nothing. Scraps, and scraps. That was about it. The only question marks over him were obviously his issues off the court, because if any general managers decided not to take a chance on him for a second round pick, which I'm pretty sure is like 55th or something, top 55 protected, basically just nothing. That's what it is, nothing. So if any general manager didn't want to take a chance on it, well, I've overestimated general managers in the league, but I just have a feeling that it would be because of his off the court issues, because there's just no way you can look at what he was able to do in his first year in Cleveland, in college and in high school and think that he wasn't going to, at the very least, be a very solid NBA player. And he's obviously got upside to be a lot more, which we're seeing in the G League and now we're seeing in the NBA. With that being said, Houston Rockets, it's your win, because Kevin Porter Jr., he hasn't missed a beat. Keep in mind, he missed months of playing time, months of practice. He was out for an extended period of time. He's come into the G League. He was dominating from the get-go, came into the point guard role. They want to develop him as a point guard player. That's where they see the vision. As I mentioned in a video before, Kevin Love said he reminded him of a Russell Westbrook. And some people were like, oh, he's a James Harden. That's what Kevin Love said. He was the one who practiced with him for a year and played with Russell Westbrook. So I'll take his word over it, over mine and other people's. He said he reminded him of a Russell Westbrook. And Russell Westbrook initially started as a two-guard and then transitioned into a point guard, similar to what Kevin Porter Jr. is currently doing. So that's all I'm going to say. Now, before I go any further, if you could drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel, that would be much appreciated. It's free. It just really helps out a lot, and it would be much appreciated. But getting back to it, yeah, the Rockets got a steal on Kevin Porter Jr. We knew it at the time. We know it now. He just dropped 27 and 8, I believe, against the Utah Jazz. He put up 25 shots. Some people might be, oh, of course he's going to drop 27 on 25 shots. But if you actually watch the game, you see that he was able to get to the rim at will. He did a number of things that I really liked. Firstly, he was taking advantage of his mismatches. So when Mike Conley was guarding him, he knows Mike Conley's too small for him. He was attacking him, getting to the rim. Even Donovan Mitchell's probably a bit too small to guard someone like Kevin Porter Jr. 6'5", I think. He's a tall, pretty athletic, big guy, so he can get to the rim on those smaller guards. And then when he was up against the bigger guys, he was either blowing past them or getting around them in the pick and roll, doing a number of things to use his foot speed. So he had a nice combination of making the right plays. It seems like little things, but those are the little things that go a long way when you're looking at players that are still young, because some people just never figure that out. They never figure out how to work the pick and roll. They never figure out how to take advantage of mismatches, how to quickly get it into your bigs if you need to. All of those little things are what make good NBA point guards, and Kevin Porter Jr. is already showing that he has that kind of mentality on the court. And then, well, getting back to the 25 shots, if you actually watched the game, there were quite a few shots that were just kind of failed possessions for the Rockets because they couldn't get too much going outside of Porter Jr. If you watch the game, their offense was pretty terrible when he wasn't involved. When he went off the floor, they couldn't really score except off turnovers and in transition. They played hard defense, but they had no shot creators, no playmakers, no nothing really going for them when he wasn't on the floor. So he was taking some tougher shots, which I think he'll eventually need to tone down, but I also think he won't be taking as many tough shots because it wasn't like he was just taking them at the start of the shot clock. A lot of those times were they were passing the ball around, they couldn't find any openings, and then he'd launch up a three. He did that a couple of occasions, and those were a couple of shots that were tough to take. So that's kind of why his shot numbers were quite inflated, but I think what we saw was so promising. He can get to the rim, he can get to that little floater spot. His pick and roll game was so elite. It was really, really good. He was finding the right angles. Sometimes he left his feet a little bit early, which was a little bit frustrating because he kind of got caught in the air, and the roll man wasn't exactly on the same wavelength as him. He's been playing in the G League. He hasn't played with these guys barely at all. First start with the Houston Rockets, so he just wasn't quite on the same wavelength. So when he was leaving his feet, there were a couple of occasions where he got caught out. On one occasion, he left his feet, and he kind of just hung in the air and still dropped it off to the roll man. Like, he just made some great plays. That right-handed acrobatic layup, which I'm sure you've seen the highlight of in the fourth quarter, was absolutely ridiculous. There was another one where he spun off Donovan Mitchell, broke him down with a handle, and then dropped it into a roller again. His pick and roll game with Christian Wood is going to be absurd. Two players that they got for nothing. Two players that are steals. Two players that have had some issues in the past, and 2 players that are looking like future stars. It might be a bit early to say that on Kevin Porter Jr. It's just been a couple of games, but what I've seen in the G League, what I saw in Cleveland, there were a lot of players. I mean, Kevin Love, like I mentioned, he said he was clearly the most talented player on the Cavs roster.
If you look at our entire team and you take KP, you take Kevin Porter Jr., and you stack him up, he was by far the most talented guy we had on our roster.
And that was recently, after Sexton and Garland have had good seasons. So, like, we know the kind of talent they've got here. It's not just some kind of, he can be a good upside guy. No, he can be a genuine star. There's no questions about that. Same for Christian Wood, who is obviously the MVP of the league because the Rockets haven't won without him. Sorry to bring that up, Rockets fans, but it's a good thing because you've got the MVP. You've got the most valuable player. To the definition, is he not the most valuable player in the league? Because if your team is 11-10 and then 0-15 without you, is that not the most valuable player in the league? John Wall, I know you said it was your team. It's not. It's not. You're now the 3rd best player because Kevin Porter Jr. is better than you. I'm just going to say that. But what's so promising to me is I saw some of his G League clips. I watched a little bit of in-game footage and stuff like that. It just kind of looks like a similar game for him. You would have thought it might take him a little time to adjust to the NBA. Not really. He's playing the same role. He's getting the same kind of usage rate, which will go down as well, obviously, when he plays with different kind of guys. But he's getting the same opportunity on the Rockets as he was in the G League. And it just doesn't look much different for him. It just still looks like he's kind of playing the same game that he was playing in the G League, which is so promising because it can often be a different kind of level. And for him to just kind of seamlessly transition into a high usage point guard at the NBA level, that is not an easy thing to do. And to break down the Jazz's defense, one of the best defenses in the NBA, so consistently, when you didn't really have any other shot creators, any other playmakers on the floor, he was asked to shoulder the whole load. Like, he was asked to do a lot. So maybe he was a little bit inefficient. Maybe he had a couple of turnovers, but it was for good reason because he was asked to do all of it and they weren't doing anything when he wasn't creating. It's kind of scary to think how good he can be when he gets embedded into the system. When he plays with Christian Wood, that's going to be ridiculous. If the Rockets manage to get someone high in the draft pick as well, like a Jalen Green, that's going to be an athletic team that's going to be one of the most fun teams to watch in the NBA. Just Christian Wood and Kevin Porter Jr. alone make them one of the most fun teams in the NBA. You add in a Jalen Green. Cade Cunningham's going to the Pistons. Sorry, Rockets fans. But you add in a Jalen Green or a Cade Cunningham, either one. It's just going to be ridiculous what they could do with this kind of athleticism, getting out in transition in the pick and roll. All guys that can stretch the floor, can create off the dribble, can do a number of things. Houston, all of a sudden, they've gone from a team where people questioned, did they mess up the James Harden trade? Should they have got Ben Simmons? Should they have got Karis LeVert? Was this a mistake? All of these things, all of a sudden, if you get this kind of production out of Kevin Porter Jr. where he looks like a future star, then kind of it just goes away. Because you've got Kevin Porter Jr. and Christian Wood for nothing. Would you have liked to get more things out of the James Harden trade? We'll see. We don't know yet. But say they flop on that trade, they've done bits outside of it. They've done fantastic things outside of it, Jae'Sean Tate. So they managed to do the absolute best with nothing, but with the most, then maybe they don't do the best. If that even makes sense, you get what I'm saying. They've done the most with absolute nothing. It's been fantastic. Jae'Sean Tate, they've had so many undrafted players, but Jae'Sean Tate, Kevin Porter Jr., and Christian Wood, that's a nice young core that are looking really solid. Just getting back to Kevin Porter Jr., I don't know if there's much more I need to say. Like, I've talked about how he was in the G League just a while back. He's the same kind of player as we just saw against the Jazz. He's someone that likes to operate in the pick and roll. He's been a good playmaker. He's really improved that playmaking aspect. He's showing that he can be a point guard level player. He's a shot creator. He can get to the rim. His three-point shot is still a little bit skeptical, but like I mentioned, when he's not trying to take such tough shots, when he's not forced to take such tough shots, I'm sure those percentages will go up because he's got enough touch. He's got enough touch around the rim at the free throw line from three-point range to not be a liability there. I can see him being a 34, 35, 36% kind of guy from three-point range, which is enough when you consider every other attribute he has. I didn't even mention his defense, which was pretty impressive as well. He had a couple of blocks, I think a couple on Donovan Mitchell. There were a couple of plays where he was staying right in front of Mitchell and Conley and then switching onto guys like Bogdanovic and doing a decent job of that. He showed his switchability. I remember in Cleveland last year when they were a terrible defensive team, people said that he was one of their best defenders just in his first season, and you saw why, because he was able to switch onto players. He showed a lot of effort on man defense. He stayed engaged pretty much the whole game defensively. He didn't make too many bad rotations or anything like that. Defensively, he looked like a plus, and then offensively, he looked fantastic. It's crazy to think about it because most people thought it was a steal. I'm not saying I was the only one. There were a lot of people that thought that. But I think when you look at it, the perspective that he could have been a top 10 player in the draft class. If he was drafted like 9th overall and then a year later he's traded for nothing, people probably have a different perception of this than him being drafted 30th overall, which was a clear slip for reasons that were probably off the court, which transpired in Cleveland. And then he had a good rookie season in Cleveland. Someone like Kevin Love called him incredibly talented, compared him to Russell Westbrook, which is incredibly high praise. And then he gets traded for a bag of bones. Like, we shouldn't be looking at Kevin Porter Jr. as someone who's just kind of out of nowhere. He's blossoming. No, we should be looking at him as someone who's a legit talent. And if he was a top 10 pick in last year's draft, people would be looking at this and thinking, how did the Rockets manage to do this? It's still, how did the Rockets manage to do this? Like I said, they were the ones who wanted to take a chance on him. They were the ones that backed themselves in. They have John Lucas, who apparently has done good work with other players in terms of helping them off the court. You've got someone like John Wall, who had troubles in his past, might be able to mentor Kevin Porter Jr. Christian Wood had troubles as well. Now these guys are through the other side of it. So maybe those guys can be the reason that Kevin Porter Jr. gets his off-the-court issues fixed. And then on the court, there's just never been a question in my eyes, in probably the eyes of a lot of people, that he's incredibly talented. And as a point guard now, he looks like he's flourishing to a different level to what he was in Cleveland when he was already playing pretty well. It's crazy that the Rockets managed to get Christian Wood and Kevin Porter Jr. for absolute nothing. And Jae'Sean Tate, add him into the mix. They've done some bits there. They've just done some bits. It's incredible. So I don't know how they got away with it. I don't know why no one stopped them. No one did. And Kevin Porter Jr., if he stays all good health-wise, he's going to be a future all-star, I think. You can't watch that game and not think he can break down defenders. He can go up against smaller defenders. He can break down bigger defenders. His pick-and-roll game was elite. He was consistently dropping it off to the right spots. He had good recognition. He can make tough shots, which we need him to make some of the easier shots from three, but he can do everything. You can't watch that game and not think he's not a future all-star level player. And the Rockets got him for nothing. So congrats, Rockets fans. Good job. What else can I say? Have a good day.